want to thank all of you for attending the support roundtable on the crisis facing Afghan women and girls under the Taliban's oppressive rule in Afghanistan. I want to thank my dear friend, Roya Romani, who served her country very well and is a dear friend of mine. And also Miss Adia Amri and Hanafi Garal for joining us here today. It's important that we have this discussion on Afghanistan women, led by Afghan women. I've watched with great concern as the Taliban has continued to restrict the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan since the collapse in August of 2021. I've heard from many women who have witnessed the barbaric acts of the Taliban firsthand. Since the Taliban's takeover, nearly 20 years of progress in women's rights have been erased. The Taliban has issued more than 30 edicts aimed at severely limiting women's freedoms. Afghanistan is the only country in the world where girls are banned from attending school above the 6th grade, the only country in the world. Taliban has also banned Afghan women from working for NGOs. A concern of mine will have Samantha Power, USAID, testify this afternoon. I'm going to ask her about this. But also prohibited from working at the United Nations. They're inhibited the delivery of humanitarian aid, which is desperately needed by the women in Afghanistan. Afghan women and girls are not allowed to go to public parks. They're required to cover their faces in public and must be escorted by a male chaperone, a model, whenever they leave the house. The Taliban has essentially banned women from public life and intend to permanently place all women on house arrest. Quite frankly, they're treated like property. Moreover, in addition to losing their rights and freedoms, women and girls who disobey the Taliban's edicts have been flogged, whipped, stoned, tortured, and killed. Afghan women are forced into marriages with Taliban fighters and face constant threat of sexual assault. We continue to work to evacuate at-risk Afghan allies, especially women and children from Afghanistan, because they're simply not safe. During the fall of Kabul, there was so much chaos. It seemed every congressional office turned into its very own State Department. Members were helping everyone they could evacuate. I know I helped Roya, we helped your family, 16 family members. The women especially were desperate to save the lives of their children and themselves from the Taliban. And we all remember the photos of the mothers attempting to throw their children over barbed wire fences into the arms of the US military. One group of children, I remember very distinctly, music students with the Afghanistan National Institute of Music waited outside the gates of the airport for 17 hours while I and other members made desperate high-level calls to try to secure their passage to the airport and onto an evacuating plane. However, they never made it inside the airport that day. I'd always wondered what had happened to them. And so I was at a Gravies on the Hill award ceremony, and next to me was a man from Kabul who had a music school in Portugal. And I remember that these girls had Portuguese visas. And then I put the two together and asked him if this was his school, were these his girls? And he said, yes. I said, are they safe? He said, yes. And it was amazing, amazing epiphany. And Jessica Lustig, who's here, I reconnected with her. She's here today in the audience on behalf of the National Institute of Music, and thank you for being here as well. We are making plans now to have the girls and some come and play at the Kennedy Center to play their Afghanistan cultural music, and they have hopes of one day returning to their country. I'm so proud of them, and they are rebuilding that school. And I want to thank you, Jessica, and everyone else who worked so tirelessly to get people out. Not only the Afghan partners, interpreters, Americans, but especially the women and children during this withdrawal, because to be left behind, to go back to Sharia law that they never lived under before, is a nightmare of an experience. For every success story, there are more horror stories of women and girls unable to escape and now live under Taliban rule. This committee will do everything in its power to help Afghan women and girls to hold Taliban accountable for its human rights abuses. So I look forward to hearing from our distinguished guest here today. It's going to be a great conversation. I want to thank all of you for being here. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his remarks.
Let me start by, of course, thanking the panelists, for your courage and for your bravery in being here today. And of course, Ambassador Romani, it is so good to see you. We've worked very closely with you in the past, and so it's nice to see you. And I look forward to hearing from all three of you. But I'm glad to have the opportunity to read what we've done and talk to you. And I know for all three of you, this issue is close to your hearts and one that is intensely personal. So that's one of the reasons why I'm deeply appreciative of hearing and learning from you. The Taliban expeditious takeover in Afghanistan in 2021 has sent shockwaves around the world, and rightfully so. A democracy that Afghan women had helped build from the ground up for over 20 years crumbled overnight. Afghan women and girls, with their unwavering commitment to building a better future for themselves and their families, fought tirelessly to reclaim their voices, to seek education, to participate in a workforce, and to shape the destiny of their nation. Tragically, in the aftermath of Taliban takeover, we have witnessed the steep reversal of hard-fought rights and freedoms that were secured by Afghan women and girls. Decades of relative progress on social inclusion, gender equality, and women's rights have been wiped out in mere months. Since August 2021, the Taliban have erected draconian policies that violate the fundamental human rights and freedoms of Afghan women and girls. The Taliban's edicts deny women and girls access to education above the 6th grade, to parks, to gyms, and public spaces. The Taliban require women to adhere to strict dress codes and place restrictions on freedom of movement. The Taliban have prohibited Afghan women and girls from working most jobs outside of their home, preventing tens of thousands of female NGO workers from doing their jobs and contributing to a slowdown in the delivery of much needed humanitarian assistance during one of the country's most debilitating crises. The Taliban's actions have proliferated a surge in child and forced marriage while dismantling legal protections and support for women and girls fleeing domestic or gender-based violence. Afghan women who used to be the head of their households or the sole or primary wage earner are reduced to begging and to struggle to feed themselves and their families. Others who used to run businesses or work in the government have become prisoners in their own homes. In short, the Taliban have stripped Afghan women and girls of their political rights and have subjected them to the repressive ideology that denies them of their basic human rights. Taken as a whole, these actions have pushed Afghanistan back into a dark era of oppression, exclusion, and gender apartheid. As one Afghan woman recently put it, we are alive, but not living. At the same time, in spite of the Taliban actions, I have been heartened by the resilience of Afghan women and girls. Large numbers of brave women, like the three before us today, are standing up and pushing back on the Taliban's repression. They have taken to the streets and flooded social media to demand urgent action and attention, as well as advocates for the preservation of their rights. Despite intimidation, serious threats to their safety, arrest, forced disappearance, sexual violence, torture, and even death, they refuse to be silent or silenced. They will not accept the Taliban's regulation of them as second-class citizens, and nor will we. As we hear from these three courageous women today, we must do more than just listen. Let us remember that the challenges faced by Afghan women and girls are not theirs alone, but are shared by all those who believe in equality, freedom, and dignity. The United States must stand in solidarity with Afghan women and girls by working tirelessly to ensure that they are not forgotten or abandoned. We must leverage our diplomatic tools to amplify their advocacy and hold the Taliban accountable for their repressive policies and systematic oppression. I join Chairman McCall in saying that this committee will stand with you and to make sure that we also add to your voices to know that if there is a threat to human rights anywhere, it's a threat to all of us everywhere. And so I look forward to your statements and this discussion on how our legislative body can ensure your human rights and fundamental freedom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize Ms. Radawani for her opening statement.
Talo Palava. Welcome and thank you to each and every one of you panelists for attending this important roundtable today. Hearing directly from Afghan women has never been more important. I'm very proud to be in this room with all of you. Stories that have come out of Afghanistan in the wake of the Taliban takeover are horrific. Women and girls face constant threat of discrimination and abuse. According to UN, gender-based discrimination in Afghanistan is worse than anywhere else in the world. When the Taliban came to power, many women were fired from their jobs or simply quit out of fear. Today, women and girls older than 12 cannot even attend school. Most Afghan women fear simply leaving the house, and many are barred from doing so unless accompanied by a male chaperone. It's most sad to consider that the Afghan women who now suffer under the Taliban were once able to learn, work, and live freely in Afghanistan. All of you sitting in front of me today were allowed to hold government jobs in Afghanistan prior to August 2021. Afghan women built dreams on the promises that the U.S. made. Dreams of a college and career, dreams that their daughters could live freely, dreams of a happy life. And today, many of those dreams have been lost. But it is my hope that this roundtable will give us the opportunity to figure out together how we can keep fighting for Afghan women's dreams. I look forward to hearing each of your ideas on how that can be done. So, thank you.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Meeks for organizing this roundtable and giving me the opportunity to provide brief remarks. I want to start by thanking our distinguished panel for joining us today to share a look at the grim reality that's facing women in Afghanistan today. And I had an opportunity to chat with each of you before we started, Ambassador Rahmani, Ms. Amiri, Ms. Shirawal. I appreciated the remarks you shared with me, some of the insights, and I know you're going to share with us things that we can do to help you moving forward. One of the most wrenching tragedies of the Taliban takeover has been the devastating impact on the women and girls of Afghanistan. Women who had high-ranking positions, productive jobs, who are now no longer able to work. Girls who are attending school, who loved learning and were preparing for the future, who are now no longer getting education. I remember meeting with a group of these women before the Taliban's takeover.
Yeah.
And we asked them if they were trying to get out of the country. And surprisingly, they told us no, that they wanted to stay and fight for the soul of their country. Since the fall of Kabul in 2021, the Taliban have issued 45 decrees sharply curtailing women's rights, including forcing women to cover their faces, restricting their ability to travel without a male guardian, and banning girls as young as 12 from being able to attend schools. Just this past month, the Taliban further banned women from working for the UN. I was proud to join Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Meeks, and many of my colleagues on the committee in sending a bipartisan letter to the UN Secretary General, encouraging the UN to oppose male-only humanitarian aid implementation. That's why the United States must work with our allies, the international community, and Afghan civil society to help women and girls be able to attend schools and universities throughout the country, to help protect Afghan women's rights activists, to provide them with access to humanitarian aids and services, to ensure that women and girls have the right to work, to move freely, and to be safe from violence, and to support meaningful participation of women in all aspects of life in Afghanistan. I'm looking forward to hearing more from our panelists today about the extreme challenges Afghan women and girls now face and the steps that we can take to help them. I'm eager to continue working with my colleagues on this committee and with the Biden administration to make sure that we have the safety, the well-being, and the basic human rights of Afghan women, and this should remain a bipartisan priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meany. And now we'll turn to our panelists. We'll start with the Ambassador Rahmani.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Meeks, thank you so much for organizing this panel. I would like to also thank the rest of the members for joining this morning. All this team and distinguished guests, staff member, thank you for your efforts. I would also like to thank you specifically for the remarks you made, Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Meeks, Representative Kathy, and Representative Redwan, who is not with us right now. I also would like to recognize my two fellow panelists who are wonderful colleagues and great women rights activists, both Ms. Amiri and Ms. Gariwal. It is hard to keep a focus in Afghanistan with waning interest in the United States. We are very cognizant of that. The fact that all along my term, both of you, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Meeks, you put so much effort in keeping the issue alive and doing the right thing during the Republic, during the evacuation, and still continue to do that really gives us hope. So really thank you for all your efforts. With that, I would like to share a few remarks. I am particularly pleased that you are focusing on the situation of women in Afghanistan, because women's roles have always been at the center of Afghanistan's politics. While it has not been the main driver of conflict in Afghanistan, they have always been at the center of moral justification for invasions, coups, oppositions, authority, and conflict. Every regime over the last century has had women's status as an anchor of their belief system and as a means of energizing their base. Either it was promising to protect women's honor by restoring traditional values, or liberating women by giving them access to public life and individual rights, be it in support of Western liberalism, communism, or Islamic fundamentalism. And even now, the international community is hesitant to provide humanitarian aid to a starving population due to the Taliban's oppression of women. Since the Taliban's takeover, the international community has used its traditional tools to try to achieve its goals, including protecting Afghan women and supporting their rights. These include imposing sanctions, publicly condemnation of the regime, threatening to withdraw aid, and holding aimless negotiations. Nothing has worked. The reason for this is, or one of the main reasons I should say for this, is a fundamental asymmetry of understanding. It has often been said that the Taliban won because they had grassroots support and better understood the people, the Afghan people. The Afghan people, in reality, largely opposed Taliban. Poll after poll, they showed that they were never in favor of the return of the regime. On the contrary, what the Taliban had was decades to observe the international community and understood how they operated. They know that just allowing girls to school or giving in some of the international community's demands will not lead to the recognition and the desired aid or support that they need. Furthermore, these capitulations would lead to a foundational undermining of the Taliban's ideology, which could be threatening their legitimacy. On the inverse, the international community does not understand why Taliban doesn't care about the pressure being applied and vastly underestimate the extent to which the Taliban are motivated by their extremist ideology. The Taliban's sacrosanct ideology has fueled the morale of its fighters for many years. Thus, intense condemnation from the international community can be perceived as a form of political capital that deeper entrenches the Taliban's hardline stances. Some have believed that some of these pressures has resulted in fractions among the Taliban, which is true. But to really bank on that, to be the source of the change to appear in Afghanistan, that is hard to see, especially in the near to medium future. So what is the way forward? What could we do? Since the other leverages didn't work, or there are other leverages that could possibly work. Right now, the Taliban have nothing to lose. They need to be given something to lose. Leverage can be created by building up a space for potential loss. It's not real or very accurate to attempt to prevent Taliban from benefiting the aid that is available at this point. They do benefit from that. Ultimately, it will benefit them one way or the other. But of course, you cannot cut that down because the people are the one that would suffer the most. So alternative is that in addition to the humanitarian assistance, development projects should resume, as and when possible. Economic projects on trade, investment, infrastructure, and connectivity that foster economic development will be particularly important. A key element of jump-starting more intentional approach in Afghanistan is increasing international coordination in all policymaking. This means immediately forming a core group of key players, including the United States, United Kingdom, several EU countries, key Islamic countries such as Qatar and Indonesia, UAE, and Turkey, who meet monthly to discuss and coordinate key priorities in Afghanistan. It also must be ensured that NATO countries are closely and minutely coordinating security, intelligence, and counterterrorism strategy. The US must also work to find ways to better comprehend and navigate Taliban leadership. The point of engagement is not simply to engage. The West needs to engage in order to be able to better maneuver. This is mainly identifying people closest to the leadership and finding ways of influencing them. Shifting from a focus on emergency humanitarian assistance to more sustainable and large-scale economic development initiative reorients the sense of dependency from the people to the regime. This increased dependency of the regime also creates a new potential point of leverage for the international community. This will also counter the loss of a foothold that's now being felt with countries that are hostile towards the United States. For example, acquiring Afghanistan estimated 1 trillion in mineral wealth, which includes a trove of rare earth minerals, a large supply of lithium critical to green energy transition, and other critical resources, deepens the Chinese stranglehold on the key green technology supply chain. Even though Chinese mine development in Afghanistan has slowed recently, ownership of these key resources still gave them increased long-term control of critical minerals market in the future. China's recent deal to draw Afghanistan into the Belt and Road Initiative is only first step of many to happen. Education is another cornerstone. The West can help pay teachers' salary, and the US could include tablets uploaded with controversial educational material with long-life batteries that does not require internet connection, given that it's becoming increasingly less accessible, especially to women and poor families, to access internet and even electricity. That would elevate the access to education at this point for the girls who cannot go to school. For university students, facilitating eye-opening regional and global educational exchanges could be key to preventing indoctrination and radical training from being at the core of how the next generation is raised. In this context, the vast private university network that existed before could be supported and utilized. At least the Fulbright scholarships should be restored for both Afghan men and women. In conclusion, the US is engaged financially. It is disengaged on policy in Afghanistan. The situation must be carefully navigated given moral complexities and the pitfalls that is associated in terms of dealing with the Taliban. But Afghan women cannot be scapegoated for the West's decision to disengage. Moving forward may require some short-term compromises, certainly not on recognition or other formalities, but on re-engaging on development projects for the benefit of the whole population. It must be recognized that all is not lost. At least at this point, it's not all lost. The US can protect its regional interests. The people of Afghanistan can be supported, and something better is possible. The only real failure would be not to try at all. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Well said and great takeaway points for the committee. Chair recognizes Ms. Amiri.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Meeks, Representative Hattie, ladies and gentlemen. I stand before you today to bring urgent attention to the dire situation faced by the women of Afghanistan. Before I begin, I request that we all have a moment of silence to honor and respect the fearless women of Afghanistan who are fighting for their rights on the streets of Afghanistan, even as they face imprisonment, torture, rape, and death. Thank you. The continued oppression of human rights and marginalization of women's rights from public life by the Taliban have a devastating impact on the society, the economy, and more broadly to the country and the people of Afghanistan. Today, Afghanistan has become the most totalitarian country for women and girls in the 21st century. The Taliban selectively manipulate religious teachings to justify their oppressive practices and promoting extremism through their madrasas. Multiple reports from reputable sources such as Amnesty International and UN Special Reporter for Afghanistan and other sources have shed light on the grave violations of women's rights under the Taliban regime. According to the data from USIP, Taliban has issued 116 decrees to restrict human rights and oppress women's rights, in which 65 of them alone is on women's rights, and 17 are about employment, 15 are about banning women from public spaces, and 10 are about restriction on women's mobility. This is undeniably a war against women. I call upon women leaders, democratic nations, and Islamic scholars who have been silenced up until now and who believe in human rights and democracy to unite in their condemnation of the Taliban's oppressive regime. Words alone is not enough. We must act. The international community must speak with a unified voice and engage strategically with the people of Afghanistan. We cannot afford to have conflicting messages or compromise the rights of the people of Afghanistan for their own interests. Instead, we must hold the Taliban accountable for their actions, sanction them, freeze their assets and businesses, and ensure that they are treated as the terrorists they truly are. Also, it's crucial to recognize that human rights and women's rights should be the only condition of engagement with Taliban. The dialogue between Afghan people and the Taliban should be facilitated, and the option of recognition should absolutely not be on the table. Recognizing the Taliban will not only validate their atrocities, but also undermines the hard-fought progress made by the people of Afghanistan and the sacrifices of our international allies. The concern regarding the misuse of funds by the Taliban are critical, and that must be addressed with utmost seriousness. The US and funding donors should implement robust checks and balances to ensure that the allocated funds reach the people of Afghanistan, especially the women, and specifically the educated women that they are right now struggling and are a prisoner in their own house. The US have been involved in Afghanistan for over 4 decades, and now it's time for them to adopt a people-centric approach toward Afghanistan. We, the people of Afghanistan, were called allies. We were called friends. We stood by our commitment, fighting an imposed war against terror on behalf of the world for 2 decades. However, we were abandoned and left alone. It's now the responsibility of the international community, particularly the UN, to stand by your words and help the people of Afghanistan. We cannot forget the promises of friendships and alliances that were made. While I understand the sentiment that we have been always hearing that the US or other countries cannot police the world, it's very important to remember that the Afghan people who have lost hundreds and thousands of lives in these past 2 decades were not merely a sacrificial lamb. How much more the people of Afghanistan, especially the women, should suffer for the world to realize and recognize that enough is enough. We urge decisive action to take the rights and lives of Afghan women and girls whose voices have been silent and whose dreams have been shattered. I ask my fellows here and the US Congress in particular that we should walk the talk and engage directly with the people of Afghanistan who are bearing the brunt of the Taliban's oppression. I urge you all to remember the courageous women of Afghanistan who continue to fight against immense odds for their fundamental rights and freedoms. Their struggle is not just their own, it's a fight for justice, equality, and human dignity. If the world hasn't wakened up and moved by the atrocity of Taliban yet, then we should recognize that humanity has died within us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mira. I recognize now Ms. Jiwa.
Thank you, Chairman Russell, Ranking Member Meeks, and distinguished committee members, Manfida, Women Ambassador Mani, and Asfadia Ali. Thank you so much for the opportunity here to speak about the situation of Afghan women. It has been 2 years since we felt ignored, and we are happy that finally the US policymakers are realizing that they should put attention to the situation of women in Afghanistan. We are gathered here to discuss the situation of Afghan women's life after the Taliban takeover. We all know since the takeover of the Taliban, the de facto authorities or the Taliban are systematically violating the rights of Afghan women, subjecting them to gender persecution, which is a crime against humanity. Taliban are violating the very basic human rights of Afghan women, including right to education, employment, freedom of movement, healthcare, bodily autonomy, decision-making, peaceful assembly, association, and access to justice. The system that once offered protection and support to those fleeing domestic violence has been dismantled, leaving women and girls utterly vulnerable. The imposition of extra modesty rules has resulted in the arbitrary detention and humiliation of young women and girls for alleged moral crimes. These measures have contributed to a distressing surge in rate of child and forced marriages, along with a dramatic increase in gender-based violations implemented with full impunity. Of great concern is the fact that women who dare to peacefully protest against these oppressive measures face threats, harassment, arbitrary detentions, and torture. Afghan women are facing an overwhelming fear and extreme anxiety, describing their current situation as akin to being under house arrest, just as Chairman Mackel mentioned, and living in a cage. Meanwhile, increase on the widespread mental health issues and the escalating number of suicide among women and girls is alarming. As a result of the prohibition of girls' education beyond grade 6 and the limited access to female doctors, unless these restrictions are swiftly reversed, we may witness preventable deaths that amount to homicide. I recall a moment not too long ago when my brother, during our return from Pakistan in 2004, told my sister and me that our country had been liberated. He assured us that we would have the opportunity to receive an education in our own country, serve our homeland, and live a dignified life. He fought against social barriers to allow his daughters to learn and contribute to our nation. We believe that America's war and its presence for promoting and protecting democratic values and human rights will help secure a sustainable and brighter future for Afghan women. Yet, 17 years later, I now recall us leaving behind our everything in a US military aircraft destined for an uncertain destination. Like my father, thousands of others are forced into illegal immigration to secure a brighter future for their daughters in countries neighboring Afghanistan, or are left with no choice but to stay and bury the future of their daughters alive. Millions of girls like me who could play a critical role in the sustainable rebuilding of their country or in Afghanistan, facing a silent death. As described by ranking member me, they always say that we are alive but not living. Congress members, I urge you to take a moment and imagine who you would be if a repressive regime in your country prevented you from receiving an education, having any say in your personal life, let alone making a difference in society and the world. We believe that women's and girls' rights in Afghanistan, as well as their meaningful participation, would be prioritized in Doha peace deal. Regrettably, it was not even a part of the agreement. This critical and political exclusion led to the current gender persecution plagued by decades of conflict and historical violation of the women's rights. However, while we cannot change the past, Congress can exert influence over the US administration to support the Afghan women. Women and girls must not be instrumentalized for political purposes, as it has always been, and their rights should never be used as a negotiating tool. The US should continue to remain effectively engaged in the situation on Afghanistan and take concrete steps toward providing technical and financial support to ensure accountability for serious women's rights and human rights violations. The US policymakers should push for withholding the Taliban recognition until they fully comply with human rights standards. Congress must stand united with the women of Afghanistan who are struggling to survive, including those currently residing in the United States, who, like me, are here in safety, but not in certainty of their ability to stay legally without congressional action. And still, those in the third countries living in limbo without legal pathways to safety, both of which could be resolved through congressional action to pass the Republican and Democrat-supported Afghan Adjustment Act. It is time for the United States to lead an international alliance working together on a clear agenda and action plan to bring about meaningful change in Afghanistan, because the US have the power and responsibility to make a difference and restore hope for the future of Afghan women. I also want to emphasize, at this situation, the Afghan women's resilience, both inside the country and outside the country, is the only nightmare of the Taliban, and we should make sure their voices are heard and they are effectively supported. Also, about one of the other issues that I really want to emphasize is the challenge of Afghan women's deprivation from the right to education. Unfortunately, Afghan women under the regime of the Taliban can never have access to education, and even if they do, that will be under a radicalized curricula, which will certainly change a new generation of Afghanistan into a terrorist group. So we urge Congress to provide enough financial support and technical support for Afghan women to get a chance to get quality education abroad. Thank you so much.
Thank you, so that was very powerful. Part of our frustration is we have no footprint in Afghanistan. It's very difficult to have any control over the situation. And we have NGOs in country. We will have Samantha Power, who's the USAID administrator, testify this afternoon. This is very timely. My concern is, where is the money going? And the ranking member and I sent a letter to the United Nations, along with many on this committee, asking them to require that women be a part of the delivery of humanitarian assistance, because the Taliban excludes them currently. And I don't know if women are getting any of the assistance. Can you describe the situation on the ground in terms of what is happening to this humanitarian assistance that's well intended to go to a country where half the population is starving? But in the hands of the Taliban, I'm very concerned about the fidelity of that money. Maybe start with you, Ambassador, and then this.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that question. It is a very important one. In fact, as you may know, every week, $40 million in cash is being transported to Afghanistan, and the purpose of this is being identified to help the organization who are engaged in life-saving efforts. So the money, based on the information I have received firsthand from this U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan, Mr. Tom West, is deposited in a commercial bank. Then the commercial bank exchanges it to us and gives it to the UN, various UN agencies mainly, and others who are involved in Afghanistan to do or conduct their activity. So now, in terms of your question, does it get to the women? Yes, it does. Does it get to the extent that you are intending? No. So does the Taliban benefit from that? Of course they do. It is the nation that they reign over, that they have control in whatever ways that it is. My information directly from the ground, from the agencies that are distributing aid, as well as the people, is the following. The agencies claim that although at this point, women have been totally banned from working, including being part of the distribution of aid, they have been able to quietly negotiate in certain parts at the local level. At the national level, at the formal level, of course, there is an edict and nobody dares. This is their system that I was describing, that hierarchy of power, to say, no, we are allowing women to work. But at the local level, it has been negotiated. In fact, there are some very interesting examples that some of the UN agencies realized that Taliban are completely redirecting the aid that was going to one province at one point. And then the way they handled it, they stopped. The Taliban said, why did you stop? It was healthcare support. They said, we have been given this letter by the donors that you can absolutely not work if you are the one who is controlling our activity. So over and over, they showed that. They stopped for 7 months in the province of War. And then after that, the Taliban agreed to let them go, do what they have to do. But let's not forget, that 7 months people suffered. People did not have access to the very life-saving healthcare. So is that a strategy? Yes. Did it work? It worked in one place, but is it going to work in everywhere? I'm not so sure, but of course it has all the problems with it. So the aid has a lot of issues with it. The United States is still the biggest donor of the aid to Afghanistan. Last year, you gave $2 billion to aid, to the humanitarian aid for Afghanistan. The total amount of humanitarian aid spent last year was almost similar, or maybe about $1 billion short of the budget that ran the country before the Taliban's takeover. What is the result? The population is starving at more and more. This is the reality of how the humanitarian aid works. Lots of it does go to overhead. Lots of it does evaporate. It doesn't get to the people. Women get shouldered out. And now in a context that women are not even able to work, it is even more limiting. But does it trickle? It does trickle. But the key word is just trickle.
And that's not satisfactory. I want to shift just because I have limited time to Ms. G. Rawal. The UNW Secretary General Mohammed is talking about a pathway to recognition for the Taliban. You mentioned that in your opening statement. What are your thoughts on that, and how could that possibly take place?
Thank you, Chairman. I think any idea on the recognition of the Taliban or any strategy on the recognition of the Taliban must be conditioned with holding the human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan. We cannot allow the international community to again sit with the Taliban, just as they did during the Doha peace agreement, unconditionally, and allow them to get international recognition without respecting the rights of Afghan women, and despite knowing that they are committing a gender persecution in Afghanistan. And coming to the previous question on the aid, I think the aid, humanitarian aid is really critical at the moment for Afghanistan. And yeah, it is reaching, just as Ambassador Rahmani mentioned, it is reaching to an extent to the Afghan women. However, I think Congress can play a critical role in establishing effective monitoring mechanisms on how this aid is being delivered and whether it's really getting to those who are vulnerable enough to receive this.
Thank you. Mr. Amir, do you have any final thoughts?
Sure. In regards to your question of whether the people of Afghanistan, particularly the women, would consider even having Taliban to be recognized, I have 3 words for you, and that's no, no, no. Because the people of Afghanistan, especially the women of Afghanistan, suffered long enough, and we have the experience to even consider this terrorist group to operate as a legitimate country and rule our country. I also want to emphasize on the fact that the people of Afghanistan throughout the years, starting from the 90s, experienced the presence of Taliban in our country. We already know that what it's like to have a terrorist group to rule our country, but at the same time, we are experiencing the same history again. Now, the world and the international community waited for almost 2 years to see whether the Taliban will change. And I am sure they have seen that the Taliban has changed, but in a worse version of Taliban that we see today. They haven't done anything or the promises that they highlighted they will do for the people of Afghanistan. Also, we should recognize that there is an alternative for this. And the alternative for this is the young generation and this new generation of Afghanistan, particularly after 9/11. That generation is in shock. And the woman right now is our women who are the champions or right now on the streets of Afghanistan, fighting, shouting and chanting for their very basic rights that in other parts of the world, it's not even for negotiations. But we are talking about getting our rights to go for school, education, employment, and others, which is very basic. Now, the generation that was not part of the bone is the generation that you can invest. And that generation is someone that were not part of any type of deal, and today they're suffering in Afghanistan. I agree that most of the educated women and people of Afghanistan that were fortunately evacuated, but they're struggling in other countries to be recognized, they have identity crisis, they have financial crisis, they have cultural crisis, and they're going through a very rough time. I agree that they are physically safe, but they should be focused and they should be given enough attention because these people had a life in Afghanistan. They were career people, they were established people in Afghanistan, particularly women, but right now they're suffering in many parts of the world. So we have to recognize their presence also. And the investment on the new generation, I'm certainly sure that you have been engaged with most of that, and I'm sure you see that your investment in democracy and human rights and women's rights is the product of that. So I urge the Congress not to forget and not to abandon it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Reach is recognized.
Thank you for your testimony, and it's emotional for me just to hear, because I think that just listening to you, the debate that's going on, and I want you to know that I don't think that the members of Congress have forgotten about Afghan women and girls, whether you're Democrat or Republican. I think that we do have differences of opinion on what's the best way to move forward, which is what I would hope that we would do. We better figure out the best way to move forward. And the discussion that I've heard from you is the same kind of dialogue and conversation that we have among ourselves. Some say we should just not give anything because the money goes to the Taliban. Some say that if we do that, then we're completely abandoning the people that are on the ground and that we want to hurt. They're the ones that will suffer the most. So some say that we've got to continue with humanitarian aid and other kinds of mechanisms. But if it's not going to where it's intended, they say, well, then the United States taxpayer dollars are being wasted because it's not helping. These are legitimate debates that we have because we do care from both parties about Afghan women and girls and want to see the change. The question is, how do we accomplish it? I heard from the ambassador that we needed to do more development projects and other things in that regard, that would help. But then the Taliban also benefits from that. And that's something that many folks, have a problem with. I understand that we don't recognize this Taliban, this cruel, evil head. I mean, it's not a real government. But how do we get around it? One of the things that I've heard that I guess I agree with is national coordination of all countries. I'm a multilateralist myself. That's a position I take. I don't think that America can do anything by itself. I think we can do it in coalition with our NATO allies, with Qatar, with others that are trying and want to do the right thing and figure out how we do that together, because the Taliban must be receiving its resources from someplace else. But if we stick together, then the resources that it's getting cannot be enough for them to survive, unless you tell me differently. And then they have to look toward us. But at the same token, I think you said this too, Ambassador, that China's there. And if we do nothing, and if we stop investing in everything, other than maybe just humanitarian aid, that China's Belt and Road Initiative and the minerals that are therein, they will control. So it gives me, I'm really trying to figure out here how we don't get involved in politics in the United States, but we can figure out a compromise between Democrats and Republicans and the Afghan women of what we can to make a difference. So it's kind of open-ended question, because look, I'd be lying if I tell you that I'm not sitting here reliving part of my own life, different contexts, with stories of my mother, who had to fight for her rights to get an education in the United States because there was a time they did not want to educate Black people. She has given me stories of just lining up in the South, where she's from, and being beaten, dogs and all kinds of things, fighting for the right to get an education. So when I hear that, and being the father of 3 daughters, 3 granddaughters, I can't imagine them going through what you and your families have gone through, and women and girls are going through every day. I'd do anything to, as someone said about their father having to take their family someplace else and not sure, and I just can't. It just emotionally, it's making me feel, what can I do? So I guess that's my question. I'm trying to figure out what my question is. What can I do? I gotta do something. And I'd like to get it, find out what that consensus is. What can I do? What can we do? So that it doesn't cause a political divide. Mr. McCall and I get together, we all together. We want to do this in a bipartisan way. We really do. And I understand their position and my position, but how do we do it? I don't know. So I don't know if you have those answers, but I'm in December.
Can I try to take this up? Okay, so, I hear you loud and clear, and I also understand, or let me put it this way, I'm very sober in terms of the political restrictions that you are dealing with here. Afghanistan is a tired story. We are cognizant of that. So with that, here's what I propose in my remarks, and I'm going to say again. China is there. It's not about now. It's about the future. It's about the minerals. It's about the control of the market. It's about your access to those minerals. The Taliban's, the biggest deal that they had economically was with Russia, purchasing grains and other resources. The trade with Iran is projected to reach $2 billion high. So that should, I hope, give you some political capital to work with. And on the other hand, I don't think it is, you can think of your interests in Central Asia as a region with not having Afghanistan in mind. So in terms of practical steps, what could be possibly done? I suggested, as you said, by no means cutting the life-saving aid. It is the lifeline of people literally dying. And as Ms. Amiri mentioned, your friends, your allies, the people, 70% of whom are under the age of 30, and they only know in Afghanistan that US was present in it. So they are suffering, they are starving. By no means I would advocate for cutting aid, no. But does it help the Taliban? Unfortunately, yes. So that's why I would say, I'm saying, going to the route of recognition would only elevate them. But why not, instead of that, work on elevating and recognizing people by restarting development projects, the same way that others do. Working on those so that you can lift up the people and shift also the dependencies and the culture that the aid dependency creates from the people to the regime. So that, and then some new innovative approaches in terms of how you are engaging with aid. You are distributing aid, but maybe incorporate some new approaches that would work better. One of the examples, again, that I was giving was working out a possibility of inserting tablets into the aid packages, where those girls that are out of school could at least access textbooks. And I'm speaking from experience. I was one of those girls many decades ago. I read every book that I could find, every text that I could find at least 5 times. There was nothing else to read. Just I didn't have access, no school, no education, no ability to even get out, and nothing to read. That would help so much, because by not doing anything and letting it that passes for those girls and boys being out of the school and under the oppressive regime, that regime deepens. It becomes internalized. So but let me say one last thing. I have put together a report about way forward and also about lessons learned. It is going to be up this month. It's a long one, about 4
Make sure we
pages.
get that.
Yeah.
So please, and I'm trying hard to have summaries of it on top. It is going to be launched this month, and I hope that it would be some help to your attempts. But also, once again, I really thank you. Thank you for keeping this issue alive and thinking about it, and your work and your leadership, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Rees, for this.
May I, Chairman? I think there are 3 ways in three things that Congress can really do. I really appreciate your honesty on asking this question, what really Congress does. I think let's be realistic on the situation of Afghanistan and take the actions that can really bring a change in the situation of Afghan women specifically. The first thing will be to pass the Afghan Investment Act to help those who are evacuated, those women who are evacuated, find a legal pathway so that we can get the confidence to raise our voices against the Taliban. Unless I'm not sure whether I will be here in the US a month from now, I will never be confident enough to raise my voice for the Afghan women. If I'm afraid and intimidated that I may be sent back to my home country, to Afghanistan, facing the Taliban, why would I raise my voice? Why will I support the gender persecution? Why would I support the advocacy against gender persecution that is going on right now? The first thing will be to advocating and passing the Afghan Investment Act. The second thing will be supporting the advocacy of Afghan women from preventing UN to unconditionally recognizing the Taliban. Why are we having a blind eye on what Taliban are really doing? UN is saying, Amina Mohammed is saying that let's give them an opportunity. Let's give them a platform. Maybe if we recognize them, they will also accept our conditions and they may allow Afghan women. If Taliban are oppressing their own nation, the women of Afghanistan, the women of their own country, how are we expecting them that, if they are not doing it now, how are we expecting that they will do it after the recognition? What are the guarantees for that? Who can guarantee that? I'm sorry that I'm coming again and again to Doha, but this is what they were saying back then during the Doha negotiation, that they will allow Afghan women to work, to get education, and to have access to their basic human rights, but they didn't do that. And the third thing will be, I think it is really critical to, although I'm not really sure how effective it is, but I think we can encourage the Islamic countries to challenge the ideology of the Taliban. What they are doing is not religious. What they are doing to Afghan women is not cultural. It's not traditional. They should allow Afghan women to live a dignified life and have access to all their rights. And I think Islamic countries can really play a critical role on that. And we should encourage them to keep challenging their ideology and their theories on the women's rights. Thank you.
Just to add a few points, to echo my colleagues here, the Taliban has taken the people of Afghanistan as hostage, and there's two reasons for that. The first reason, they want the unconditional flow of the funds that they want to use on behalf of the people, and they are trying to, they have been using it for their own benefit. As a ranking member, you have mentioned that you are worried about whether the funds will be used to the right people, to the intended people. Mostly no, they have been using for their own interest. And as I mentioned before in my speech, there should be a mechanism for checks and balances by the international community and by the donor states. Another point that the Taliban is using the people of Afghanistan, particularly women, as a tool is to get the recognition. Once they get the recognition, and they're trying right now, as you see, especially in the past almost 2 years, they are trying to showcase to the world that there is a moderate Taliban in between them. But based on the experience on 2 terms of the Taliban that they have captured Afghanistan, there is no moderate Taliban. There is no Taliban that they are trying to showcase to the world that we will at some point allow women of Afghanistan to go get education or go to work. That's absolutely a big lie, and that they're trying to show to the face of the world. Now, what we can do in regards to your question, what the Congress can do is to focus beyond the emergency aid or beyond the emergency funding to the people of Afghanistan. This emergency response that we are right now, we desperately need for the people of Afghanistan should be gone through a channel that is given particularly to the NGOs that really run by women, and this should be channeled in a way that will be delivered straight to the people of Afghanistan and to the poor who really needs it. And the third part that I want to emphasize is to make the aid conditional. If the aid is not conditional, and if we just flow the aid to the name of the people of Afghanistan, but it's going to the hands of Taliban, and there's no condition, or there's no checks and balances, and there is no follow-up whether it was given to the right people, then they're using it, and there is no condition, and they're enjoying this leverage. So I also want to emphasize on one point that I have been working with the Congress for the past years on behalf of the Embassy of Afghanistan, and I want to thank you very much and recognize that we have been having the help, and we have been having this coordination on bipartisan level, and thank you so much for that. And we are really looking forward to have your support to bring the chapter of Afghanistan, particularly the women, up alive again, because most of the times we go anywhere, we try to talk about this issue, and we hear that there is no appetite for Afghanistan anymore. So I hope this chapter will be opened again and heard by the people and by the U.S. Congress. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Sandy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share Ranking Member Meek's frustration and concerns, but I thought I would try to ask more specific questions based on some of your testimony. So, Madam Ambassador, you stated that the Taliban must be given something to lose. You said the development projects should be resumed, projects that foster economic development. So I'm wondering, how would that resumption of projects, particularly economic development projects, how would this impact the status of Afghan women? Would it improve access to jobs and education and freedom of movement? And also, are there any jobs that are traditionally performed by women that we should be supporting in particular?
Thank you very much for that practical question. So let me start. First of all, when in terms of the resumption, there was a whole host of development project that was implemented and supported through ARTF and World Bank, Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, that has all been halted. The resumption of that puts the Afghan people back to jobs, number one. AIB, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, all of these were doing those projects. So the resumption of those projects helps with employment. It reduces starvation. When we are thinking in terms of starvation, this is both for men and women. Imagine, so the way that you are helping, number one, women, is that when there is some source of income for the family, the women will benefit, the children will benefit so much better. That the men that do not have job, they are engaging in more violence against women than those who have a means to support their families. Number one. Number two, how do you get women education and employment? Then if you resume them, you work with the countries that have some leverage, that they have talks, like for example, Qatar. You engage them. Their prime minister and the chief of intelligence just had a trip to Kabul. This, like, prime minister of Qatar and chief of intelligence going to the leader of the Taliban for some sort of talks. What is that for? Of course, I'm sure that there is some element of business because they are doing a lot of business there. But then, with your leverage, with your partnership with them, it's possible to get them engaged, resume these projects, and use their leverage to identify specific work and job that it will employ women. For example, I'm just thinking out loud here, right? So let's say that there is a project for building roads. There is some back office. You say they would go and negotiate and say it would be women only offices. The women could come and do the job in the back office. There is things that they could do from home. Right now, a lot of the UN staff who are still paid through the aid, they are doing work from home. So that would open up opportunities. Then basically, before in the conversation we had on the side, was that you asked me, could there be possibility of internal resistance? And my response to you was, people are hungry. So let's elevate people to at least get to that level. if that makes sense.
Absolutely, thank you. Ms. Mary, you mentioned that the younger generation of women are at the heart of the protest. So how can we help that generation? And is there any hope that this will somehow influence the Taliban to moderate?
I want to start from the last point of your question. The Taliban is actually afraid of the women of Afghanistan. And this war that you see is against the women of Afghanistan, the Taliban. So there is no chance, there is no way that the Taliban will ever reform their ideology or their opinion towards women of Afghanistan. This is a fantasy if we will think that they will at some point change or allow the people, the women of Afghanistan to have access to the services or their rights. And in regards to what could be done, to my opinion, one of the very important points that the international community, the US and the Congress could do is to give them voice. There are thousands and thousands of women in Afghanistan. They're afraid of going out, but there are also many that they're going on the streets of Afghanistan and asking for their rights. On the other hand, there are so many women outside of Afghanistan that were evacuated, and they are trying to be a voice for those who are inside Afghanistan, and they are scared for their lives because experience has shown in the past 2 years that they were captured, they were tortured, they were completely banished, their families were tortured, and in most cases, they were sexually assaulted and raped. So this makes it very difficult for them. But at the same time, it's I guess, our responsibility to be a voice for them, however much we can, because we are outside of Afghanistan and we have some sort of physical security. And the conflict definitely plays a vital role in that.
Thank you. Mr. Wall, you mentioned that Afghan people are being forced into illegal immigration, protect their daughters. How do you think, you mentioned passing the Afghan Adjustment Act, but are there other things that the US and our allies could be doing to help address this problem?
I think, of course, let's think why the Afghan people are being forced to illegal immigration. I mentioned the reason why they are immigrating. The reason is because they are looking for a brighter future for their daughters. They cannot let their daughters die in Afghanistan in front of their faces. They want a brighter future for their family, they want a brighter future for their daughters and their sons. That's why they are immigrating out of Afghanistan. So the first action that we can take is let's address the issue that is causing this immigration, which will be certainly, again, pushing Taliban for respecting the women's rights and human rights in Afghanistan, so that the Afghan people can regain a hope of a dignified life again, and they can stay in their own country. And of course, the second thing will be, again, passing Afghan Adjustment Act, and those who were promised that they will be bring to the security, to a secure situation, and to third countries who are currently residing in Pakistan and Iran and Tajikistan, who have these P1 cases, P2 cases, and who were promised by the US government that they will be brought to safety, but they are still stuck there, and there isn't any viable and practical way on what will happen to them. They are living in a legal limbo.
Thank you. Thank you again for your presentations today and for your courage in pushing this issue forward. And I yield back.
Mr. Key.
Thank you so much. Just in the last several minutes, I think it's just constrained as it can be. You gave us some very, several great points that at least know what we can focus on. It included, empowering and providing pathways for women that hear, so they can speak up and become more forceful and use their growing resources here back. Secondly, not joining with the UN recognition, well, these activities are still happening. Working with the Islamic countries to have a coordinated, more powerful voice in this, and making sure that aid is conditioned, even if it's not being adhere to, and some of it's making sure that those don't go off. So those are very practical things. I want to thank you. It's worth it for me alone to hear that, because we are getting frustrated.
Yeah.
And we're not happy that that's all the things that can be done, but at least you've given us some things to focus on. The one thing I just want to comment on, both in Afghanistan and outside with observers over so many years, there's a great discrepancy with women in urban areas and the rural areas. How are we going to help some of the women and even contact or have connection with women in the rural areas who, despite much of the progress that occurred for women in urban areas, still, even before the war was ended, still were facing terrible situations, living in, at that time, where the Taliban is acting now. For them, it's not much of a change because it was never good. Can we do something to, focus on maybe what we can do for the rural?
Thank you so much for your question, Congressman William. I agree with you that in the past 20 years, the women that you see in the bigger cities, like Kabul or other bigger provinces, will definitely not completely represent the women that are in rural areas, because there was still a lot of work needed to be done. But I have one point to make here, that there is no justification. There is no justification to compare what type of problems and challenges these women in the rural areas had in the past 20 years to what they're having right now. That's absolutely uncomparable, because right now what they're experiencing has become even worse, and it's completely equal to the women who are living in the bigger cities.
Wow.
In the bigger cities, there are more exposure of women going and chanting and asking for their rights. But the women in rural areas, they had some sort of rights, they had education, they had the life that needed in the back 20 years that they had. It was nothing comparable to what we have now. There's no justification to compare what happened in the past 20 years to what's happening right now. The women are getting killed, the women are getting tortured, the women are getting raped just because they're asking their very basic rights. So to me, it's not comparable.
Wow, that's very sobering to hear. Yeah, it's even worse in those areas. But I want to just thank you. I mean, I'm coming away from this discussion, at least with some substance that you were able to give us. I appreciate that.
Yeah, great point. I concur with what you're saying. Our ranking member asked the ultimate question, what can we do? And I think you've given us some real good takeaways. Why conditioning the aid is until they allow women to work with the NGOs and receive the aid, certainly have to have a carrot and stick approach. And look forward to your report, Ambassador, forthcoming. And I can assure you, I know this man's heart, and we're a team. We will not forget the women of Afghanistan. And for everyone listening to this, we will continue to fight for the women in Afghanistan and those left behind. And if they have P1 to P2 issues, we need to get our USCIS, process those, and get them out to protect. And so we feel very strong from this issue. And I want to thank all of you for being here and your courage to stand up in the face of evil, because that is what they are. This is really the face of evil. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for this discussion. Thank you very much.
That's all.